the regional access coordinator. So thanks again for being here tonight and the participation that many of you have had in our regional program support that has been off to a good start. So just a quick little recap. So College Church has had a program going for some time, and the Ashray Foundation has recently come along on board to start their own programming, and we've been working together, sharing best practices, and have started to then work together to bring this program out. And I'm realizing this is just the overview of tonight's slide presentation, so I'm not going to get too much into it. Other than tonight, we will discuss that partnership and then mostly focus on how we go through training our volunteers so that you are comfortable with the process for how to get people their photo IDs and their birth certificates, all the pieces of all the documentation that goes along with that, and that you could then train volunteers to do that from wherever you are. So we will also help you with some the best practices for orienting your volunteers and some next steps as well. Perfect. So once again, College Church, we have had our program for almost 30 years. We started in '93. It was a parishioner-led effort in its earliest days, and it still is mostly volunteered by the volunteers are mostly parishioners, some SLU students as well. And there has been a development of paid staff as well, because the program has become such an important piece of the College Church social ministry. So the program is open every week on Tuesday. We have recently had to scale back a little bit. We had been seeing so many folks that we start at 9, and we see we have about space for about 50 folks that morning. So as soon as we've gotten 50 people to pull a ticket, we close the doors and make sure we are able to see all the people who've showed up at that point. Mostly that's walk-in folks. Otherwise, we do have some appointment availability. That is kind of a hit or miss thing. People's schedules are hard to predict. So we mostly rely on the walk-in component. We help provide payment for birth certificates and IDs once per person every 2 years. And in the past year, we saw almost 4,000 people. So it's a pretty big effort here in St. Louis, and we're really grateful for the efforts of everyone else who's signing on.
So I'm Sarah. I'm currently serving as the executive director of the Ashray Foundation. Ashray is a Hebrew word. It's the first word in the book of Psalms that is commonly translated to mean happy, but has a deeper meaning that is more about the forward progress or movement towards happiness. So we were founded earlier this year by Rabbi Susan Talby, sort of functioning as this independent nonprofit social justice engine, if you will, of Central Reform Congregation, which for the last almost 40 years has been the only Jewish synagogue in the city of St. Louis. So the Ashray Foundation sort of exists in 3 big buckets, which is like empowerment, activation, and interruption. Empowerment for Ashray Foundation is less sort of like this top-down, I shall bestow it upon you and you shall be empowered, and more like, what barriers and obstacles can we help get out of the way? Can we help break down so that individuals can realize their full potential? And then certainly activation is sort of taking that like energy and motion and movement and like putting it into motion. And then interruption is fairly self-explanatory. So what are the times that we have to interrupt oppressive systems so that we can create more equitable and just communities? We exist sort of in 4 program areas, if you will: partnership investments, policy and advocacy, community building, and direct assistance. And so, like most nonprofit plans, our work with the Photo ID Project kind of blends several of those together. So we started, as Madeline mentioned, earlier this year in a collaboration with St. Francis Xavier College Church and the Tabernacle Community Development Corporation, which is located in the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood in North City. Actually, College Church and TCDC had tried a mobile site for the ID clinic last year. And probably for a million reasons, like it didn't quite get off the ground as much as folks had happened. And maybe the more I'm thinking about it is like the one-off sort of idea of it, just to do it one time, maybe didn't get the kind of attention it needed. So here, being in all of these different spaces, sort of hearing it, it became very clear that there was still a need in North City, and College Church having a drive and desire to expand the reach of their services. That's where Ashray comes into the middle to sort of inject capacity into that gap. And so we're running the same program that we're going to talk about tonight, which offers logistical assistance and financial assistance to obtain Missouri state IDs. So we're going to transition now into like how we would start a volunteer training. And this is like the first piece of how you bring volunteers into this work. So generally our volunteer training outline looks something like this. We're going to give a basic introduction, just like we did to our organizations, obviously making it specific to your project or your program. The bulk of your volunteer training is about how to access the documents that are like the guts of the clinic, right? Or the program. There's some other additional information pieces that we kind of add in there. And then you want to, I think, end the training with some really clear next steps for your volunteers. Sometimes, depending on the nature of your program, you might throw in there like a faith reflection or a grounding exercise at the beginning of the training, if that fits your sort of style or culture, so that you can figure, right, so that you can situate your volunteers in the why of all of the next steps, which are all what's, right, of how's to do all of the things. So let's start there. Let's dig into that and pretend we just did all of that part. And now we're ready to dive into how to access the documents at the clinic. So the first time that we will start is, the first document that we will start with is accessing a Missouri photo ID. So I'm going to pass it to you, Madeline, to give us the overview of what that looks like.
Awesome. So we wanted to start with the ID because I think that it gives us the complete picture of where a birth certificate plays into this and why it will probably play in for most of the people you'll serve. So in order to access a Missouri state ID, you need to fulfill five categories. The fifth we haven't listed because it's pretty uncommon, but we will touch upon it later. First, you need to provide a document that makes clear your identity, then your lawful status, and then proof of your social security number, and then something for your Missouri residency in order to get the Missouri state ID. Lastly, of course, you'll have to pay for that, and we'll discuss some options for that later. In this slide, we've listed underneath each of those categories some common, the most common pieces that we usually end up helping folks with. And in the case of identity and lawful status, that ends up being a birth certificate because it works for both of those. Often with the social security card, we find that most people don't really have access to their card, but many folks will be okay because there is a sort of a loophole, if you will, where if the people have had their ID renewed or replaced since 2009, they can simply recite their social security number. Lastly, the Missouri residency piece, often folks have that and we don't have to do too much prompting, but sometimes we have people who do not have a piece of mail or anything, especially if they are experiencing homelessness. So we will also discuss with you the certification of homeless status. So for now, we'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I think just a couple more details here, Madeline, if you want to continue kind of the overview of what it looks like, and then we'll dive into each of those specific categories next.
Yeah, so just as like sort of a level setting, there are some definitions that I think are oddly confusing when you get started in this work. So especially coming up in May 2023, we will be seeing a push for real ID. And so it's important that we kind of make clear right now the difference between real and non-real ID. Real ID is a document that will be required for air travel and for federal facilities. So people who are entering federal facilities would need that document. The Real ID actually has no different cost to it. Both IDs will cost the exact same. The only real differences between the two documents, again, one being just a little more of a security component, being the Real ID will have this additional layer of security that makes it so that you could travel with it. And that difference is actually just an additional Missouri residency paperwork, so like 2 pieces of residency instead of 1. That will actually mean that anyone using the certification of homelessness will not be able to get the Real ID, because they would need 2 documents, and that certification will only be 1 document. So anyone experiencing homelessness will just not be able to get the Real ID. There are also some additional social security number requirements. You can't simply recite your social security, I believe is the case. When you are applying for the Real ID, you actually need the card or some additional document that has your number on it, which we'll get into later. But that is essentially the difference between the 2 documents. They are the same in all other aspects. So real versus non-real are simply sort of this extra barrier of residency requirement for security purposes, I guess it's a security purpose. And then to clarify even further, when we're talking about IDs, we are referring to the non-driver identification card. So that would mean we're talking about the ID. You're not taking a driver's test to get this card. It's $18 for this non-driver ID. The driver's license is a little bit more than that. It's 26, I think, for 1 year, and 52 or for 3 years, and then 52 rather for 6. Anyway, so often we are helping people with a non-real, non-driver ID. And that's how we'll go for now.
So this is basically just either way. This is a sort of sample of the flow chart that we provide to volunteers when they show up to volunteer. I think we've both found that it's much more helpful in paper in a binder than it is ever on a screen and on a PowerPoint slide. So we're just kind of offering it here that you can reassure your volunteers during the training that everything that they will need to know that we're going over in the training is in materials that you should then provide to them when they show up to volunteer. No one is expected to remember this. And I think both Madeline's program and ours have worked really hard to sort of streamline all of the volunteer materials. So we're going to show them to you as we go tonight, but we won't spend too much time walking through the particular flowcharts. So the first piece then for obtaining a photo ID, so we said there were 5 and sometimes 6 if we're including payment as the 5th one. Definitely there's 5 things. So the first piece of that for obtaining a photo ID is the identity requirement. So, and as Madeline mentioned, the most common document that we see for that identity requirement is a US birth certificate. So there you can certainly use some of these other things like a current Missouri ID. So like if, for example, you have a valid ID that's going to expire soon and you go get it renewed, that is the acceptable document that you show. As you might imagine, many people that we see don't have or have never had or have had and have lost an ID, so they can't present an ID in order to get an ID. So a birth certificate is generally where we start. And I'm going to pass it to you, Madeline, to walk us through the process of how to get a certified copy of a birth certificate.
Great. So wherever you are in the state, in St. Louis, we have a specific for St. Louis application. You can look for your specific county, or you can use the Missouri State Department of Health application. It only needs to be notarized if you are submitting it by mail. And when a person takes this application, they need to also bring their identification documents with them. Now, people need a photo ID in order to get the birth certificate. Obviously, right now we're going through the process of getting the photo ID, so this becomes a bit of a complication. This can be a photo ID that just maybe like a student ID or like a bus pass that has a picture on the card. So it doesn't have to be like a government official document that is the photo ID, just a picture with the name. many people still don't have that. So 2 documents with your name on it will also work. And sometimes that looks like a letter from an agency, a piece of mail. You can get a little bit creative with that. There's some flexibility. People will take either their photo ID or their 2 documents with them, along with that completed application and payment, which is $15 in person. That can look like credit card or cash, and through the mail, that looks like maybe money order or check. There is this additional option of Vital Check, which is the online portal. That comes with additional fees. So that may not be feasible for your programming, but it's something to consider as an option. Locally, we have 2 offices that we use frequently, City Hall downtown, and then the County Vital Records office in Berkeley, Missouri. But again, wherever you are located, you'll need to kind of touch base with or orient yourself to your local office. People can apply for their own birth certificates, or immediate family members can be people applying for those birth certificates. Official representatives, that might be like a social worker or a legal representative. Other authorized agents, I'm not entirely certain what that means. But I think in this case, like, the social worker, someone working on the person's case can be there.
And if, for example, like you have someone, we encountered this once, and found a workaround, but like if someone is homebound, for example, they could authorize me, sign and notarize a letter that says, I authorize Sarah Ruiz to go apply for my birth certificate. And you kind of just like make an authorization letter. So that, I think, unlike official representatives, which would be like lawyers, doctors, medical, blah, 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 other authorized agents is maybe this catch-all for that sort of acute authorization for birth certificate purposes.
Thank you for that addition. So parents listed on the birth certificate. Now, this is tricky if you have a father who's not listed on the birth certificate, they would not be able to apply for that birth certificate. Other guardians, foster parents, and step parents are also eligible to apply. So there is also an option for homeless youth or unaccompanied youth. So all people under the age of 21 who are homeless or unaccompanied are allowed to get access one birth certificate for free. This means that they lack fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And this means they are youth that are not in physical custody of a guardian. And this would also happen through the verification, similar to the certification of homelessness document that we will eventually discuss in the residency section, but this also happens through a homeless service provider.
And I think, Madeline, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you had said that definition of lacking fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence is a fairly expansive, like a broad statutory definition, as I understand it. So it doesn't mean that an individual is living in the streets, but if they don't have fixed, regular, and adequate residence, that could mean I'm couch surfing, or I stay with my cousin sometimes and my aunt sometimes. So it's a fairly broad definition, really, and it's on the form, right?
Yeah, that's important that because a lot of youth aren't actually like literally on the streets. So fortunately, I mean, they're finding ways to stay inside, but that does still qualify as experiencing homelessness. So
that is a really good question, Shelby, in terms of whether or not being in a nursing home qualifies. My sense is no. Also, to keep in mind, this is about minors in this space. So it's probably not, this form is for youth. So you have to be under 21. So you're probably not an under 21 in a nursing home, but bring that question back up later when we talk about the DMV side of things.
Is this about getting the ID, I guess, or a birth certificate specifically?
Well, I was thinking about both, but mostly a birth certificate.
Okay, yeah. So I think in that instance, it may be worthwhile to send, like, that would be a good opportunity to mail in the application. or use Vital Check even. I mean, if in rare, not in rare, but like if you're in cases like that where you're once in a while working with someone who's just unable to leave their residence, that may be an amount of money that is worth spending the extra to get around some hoops. Thank you. Okay, and then, yeah, so there was this question of having a mistake on the birth certificate. So there is a way to amend or correct a birth certificate. This is different than a legal name change. This is simply, they spelled it wrong or something simple, minor. There is a full list of what is allowed in that, or what constitutes an amendment or correction. And that's listed on this health department website. I will say this is not terribly common from our experience. But I mean, you see in the chat, we've got someone who's having this experience currently. So there is a way to do that. It does not require a full legal service. The documents to do that are on the website. You'd probably do need a notary still. So that, you could come to St. Francis Center on a Tuesday if you're able to, or anyway, legal name changes are a little bit trickier, and we'll cover that later.
And then basically this, again, is just a sample of the flow chart that we provide to our volunteers to help them walk through this process with the guests. So we just covered everything in this flow chart for Missouri birth certificates. So Madeline, we pass it to you for out-of-state birth certificates.
Perfect. All right, so out-of-state birth certificates are fun. They are just a little bit extra because you have to keep a little bit of extra tabs on what the requirements are. And obviously we're not in the state. The reason that Missouri birth certificates can be a little bit easier, if someone can go directly to the office, it can be fast. Sometimes they're a little more lenient when you're just right there in person with them. So the out-of-state process sometimes is tricky. Each state is pretty clear on what their requirements are. We have a document that currently houses all of the links to each vital records office, and that's listed on our website. We can send that out again and make sure you have access to that, but I would certainly get comfortable with that. Figure out, okay, well, what state was your guest born in? Helpful tip here, make sure the application is signed. So sometimes it's just like a minor thing that we missed, and that gets the application sent back to us. It stops things up for a bit of time. Yes, that's great. Yeah. So anyway, the out-of-state birth certificates, when you send in your application, that birth certificate will get mailed back to you. Check to see if it needs to be notarized. Not all applications need the notary. So whether you're weighing if you need a notary on site or not, like, it's possible you could get away with not having one. It's certainly helpful if you do, because once in a while it's necessary and there's no way around it. What supporting documents might you need to be sending? Like, probably you'll need to make photocopies. So that's certainly something to consider as you get set up, but make sure you're clear for your volunteers. Whatever the guest has, you're probably going to need a photocopy of it to send out with the application. And that's a good reminder to if it needs to be returned with a self-addressed stamped envelope. I know that's true in Missouri. Sometimes that's true in other states as well. So great. Final reminder, when in doubt, just call. I think it's really important to empower your volunteers that you as the program leader might be telling them these things, but you also don't know the ins and outs of every state. You can't possibly. So you'll just end up making a phone call. So empower your volunteers to just make the phone call too. If we can call the offices will be very clear if you can get them on the phone with what they'll accept, and they'll be helpful if you can get them on the phone.
I think in one of the trainings that I did, volunteers wanted to jump into, well, what is it like in New York? But how about in Oklahoma? So just be prepared if you're giving a training that I think the point of reviewing out-of-state birth certificates is that they are not all the same, right? There's not a universal process for getting birth certificates. And so it's going to be a little bit slower, and you're going to give them the resources and the ability to like look it up and, you know, coach them through it. But maybe be prepared to sort of like not fall into that rabbit hole when you're in the training. And Madeline, I think as you were starting to say, there's sort of 3 ways that you can obtain out of state birth certificate: mail-in applications, paying it online, and then there's a couple other maybe it's just 2 online like variances. So I think that's what we're going to get into next.
Sure. Yeah. So many things you'll just submit by mail. Find the application online, look in the file index that we have. Definitely worth checking back on the websites to make sure there's been no changes. We have links set up, but certainly something can change, and it's not like an automatically linking document. So if you can double check that, that's always worth it. Definitely confirm the eligibility to apply and make sure you have all the required documentation. Definitely, I mean, double, triple check, because if you send it out and it gets sent back, it's frustrating for everyone. And we all really want this to just go through the first time. So it's worth checking again. We say 6 to 8 weeks. It certainly varies. I think some states have been like more like three months minimum, but we have no real like sense of who's what amount of time. So you can tell people 6 to 8 weeks. Definitely try to mitigate their expectations. We don't really know. We can't be sure. We hope that it'll be quick. Worth the follow-up though, if it's not received within 8 weeks, just as a standard, give a call, see where it is. Maybe they'll have more information for you. Oh, the mailing address listed on the application may need to match the address listed on the identification documents. Just double check that. If that's true, the application will inform you of that. If that's true, you'll need to be careful as you make the application. Any additions on mailing, Sarah?
I don't think so. I'm happy to talk a little bit about online applications, because I think this is something that we do
Great.
As a like backup option. But I don't think St. Francis does it, right?
No, I think we only mail.
Okay, so with good reason, because we have seen not quite 60 people to date, and College Church sees like 60 people a week. So significant changes there. Differences there, but basically VitalCheck is this like third-party company that you can obtain most birth certificates through. It is the advantage is that it's generally quicker. It's usually like you submit your application, depending on what shipping rate you select, you can get it next week. So I just had someone from Illinois, for example, who we did VitalCheck, and he applied we submitted on a Thursday, and the following Monday, so like not 3 days later, but like 10 days later, his birth certificate arrived. So why did we do that is because it is often, I find it to be most useful for clients with really limited documentation. So the reason is that I think many of us have had opportunities to be doing something online, and then you get these like identity verification questions that's like, here's 12 addresses, which one have you ever been associated with? Or, you know, have you ever had which one of these make and model cars was ever your property, right? So you answer these sort of questions that I don't actually know how they know all of this information, but if you can get through those questions properly, then you have verified your identity and don't have to come up with the documents that otherwise you might have to produce if you were doing mail-in or in person. There's 2 challenges here, in my opinion. One, VitalCheck is generally, in my experience, at least 3 times as expensive as in person or mail-in, right? So if it's like $15 for the application, you'll pay $15, sometimes plus a processing fee, plus postage. And sometimes you don't have an option like not to pay for UPS ground shipping, like it's just only $20 shipping, not the cheap, you know, like it just gets it pricey real fast. The other challenge for me in the few times that we've done it is that you have to pay for it, go through the whole thing, and then you get those security questions. And if you don't answer the security questions properly, they'll send you an email that's like, oh, we need some more required documents. And then you're back into the like predicament that you were in the first place, which is why you went to Vital Check. So far, like there was one person that we started going through, and one of those questions they couldn't answer. And they were like, I don't actually know. I don't know how to answer this. This may be this, this may be that. And we ended up backing out the application. Well, actually, I take that back. We didn't do that because we had already paid. So maybe we guessed and got it right. But you know, it's hard and stressful and expensive. Some states, the other opportunity sometimes is that some states will have their own online processing system through their Vital Records website, like through their own offices, not through Vital Check. I personally haven't encountered any of those yet, but it's sometimes worth looking for if you're really just trying to figure out. I think those are most like in the challenging situations when you truly can't come up with the things that they need. And then finally, here's our sample flow chart of the one that we provide to volunteers to walk through this process. So all of that is part one, piece number one of the photo ID, which is identity. So now we can move on to the second piece for photo ID, which is proof of lawful status. So Madeline?
Perfect. So fortunately, that birth certificate will work and double as your acceptable document for lawful status. There are many more options here as well, because this does not, you don't have to have been born in the United States in order to get a state ID. So if you have lawful status, or you are legally staying in the United States through whichever program, and you have that paperwork to show that, you would be able to use that in this case. And all of that's also listed on the acceptable documents for non-real or real IDs. And whenever you bump into those instances, you'll have the opportunity to look at more thoroughly what those things are. But yeah, we like the birth certificate because it covers both of those.
And so the third piece for the photo ID is proof of Social Security. Madeline, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So Social Security, so we like, I mentioned earlier that, well, okay, this is the Social Security card. Some people don't often have that on them. If you have a W-2 that or any of your tax paperwork that has your Social Security on it, maybe a pay stub as well, those things will also work. Generally, people don't have any of that stuff. But there is the nice workaround, which we'll talk about here in a second. So in the event that someone does not have their Social Security card and they need it, we will also discuss that. But we kind of run through this checklist. Okay, has the guest had a Missouri state ID before? Yes. Okay, if they have had the ID before, we ask, when did it expire? Maybe they don't know when it expired, but if they can tell us generally how long ago they got the ID, we can pretty well figure when it would have expired. And therefore, we can be confident most of the time people have had their ID recently enough that they do not need their card. All they need to do is recite their Social Security number. So, and if they haven't had, if this is the first time that they're getting their ID, then they would definitely need their Social Security card. So that's, you know, that's people who are just turning whatever age and getting their ID for the first time, or people who've moved here, or maybe they're just later in life and just getting it for the first time. They will need that Social Security card. They don't have it, then that's when we'll talk about the next step. We don't help with that process. We can give some paperwork to help people, like we have access to the application, but people are going to need to go down to their Social Security office in St. Louis. That's downtown by, what's that fun place called? The big adult museum. Fun place. What is it called?
City Museum.
The City Museum. It's near there.
Adult Museum. I like it.
Otherwise, South County, there's one on Watson Road. yeah, we can't do anything really other than direct people. So this can become a hang up for folks. That's pretty frustrating. It takes a little bit of time, but at least it's not going to cost them. They just need to make the effort to get to an app, to an office, or submit their application online.
And we keep copies of, there's like a one pager that we wrote some like summary explainers of how to get a social security card. And then I printed off recently like the how to get your social security card pamphlet from the Social Security Administration. And I just like have a couple of those copied when we're doing a clinic. And so that if someone needs that, I can at least equip them with the information that they need in order to get it. So the fourth piece for a photo ID is proof of Missouri residency. And this is the part that can sometimes be tricky and requires some creative juices from your volunteers. So let's go ahead and get into that. Most frequently, we would use documents like a utility bill, the voter registration card, a W-2, regardless if it has like the full social or not. It has to have your correct address and your name on it, right? So those are the two sort of pieces of information you're looking for on a document. Sometimes for this and for the birth certificates, we've been able to look up the selective service registration form online. Obviously, this is only helpful for men over the age of 18, who were 18 when they were in the United States. But it's been somewhat helpful, definitely for birth certificates, but less helpful for this if it doesn't have a Missouri address. So it's hit or miss on that, but it's worth trying. The other thing that we can use here is, again, there's probably like 40 documents that are on that link in the chat for the non-real ID PDF. These are the most common ones that we see. We've also seen hospital bills, right? So that's not exactly a utility, but a hospital bill sometimes can be requested if they don't have a copy of it. A gentleman most recently had the food stamps letter of approval that would work. So it can't be the charter junk mail that we get 12 times a week, but it has to be something slightly more legitimate, if you will. The other option here is the wow, I can't even say that word. Certification of homeless status and residency. I'm going to pass to Madeline for that since you all really got it done.
Great. Yeah, well, this was super exciting. Christine led this effort with the Missouri ID Access Coalition, and we have been like, for however long, College Church was sort of like able to use just a letter that we had created to say we were vouching for people who were experiencing homelessness, and they were able to use our address, but this was only with a couple of DMVs locally, and just because of like relationships that have been created. So through the efforts of the coalition, they were like, we need to make this more widely available. Like we are one agency, there's just no way this shouldn't be more widely available around the whole state. So this summer, it finally went through. The DOR has an official form. It's form 5862, and it's called the Certification of Homeless Status and Residency. It creates an option for people to use the address of the social service agency that they are working with, whoever they're working with, to apply for this document. Well, I guess not that they even need to be the ones who are helping them apply. Sometimes we will have people come to us at College Church on Tuesday with the form pre-filled from whichever homeless service agency they're working with, and they're not even going to use our information, but they have already, I want to say like Gateway 180 has done this before for them. And so that means that the address of the social service agency will become the address on their ID. The ID would then get sent to that agency. This can be a little tricky if you're just a pop-up clinic and you're only hoping to offer this service every once in a while. If you don't have an employment identification number, you would not be able to fill out this form for this person, but you may know of the agencies locally who could do this on their behalf and kind of create that relationship on days you host a clinic. I could get a little further. The form itself lists like what exactly a homeless service provider means. It's a very loose definition, fortunately, actually, so that most people who are working with someone and are able to provide an address could vouch for the person. So I'll just read that to you. A Missouri governmental or nonprofit provider with a Missouri address serving a homeless individual or unaccompanied youth. So, I mean, we're a church. We don't house anyone overnight, but we are serving people on that Tuesday. So we are a service provider, and that's it. There's some additional regulation information there, and you need to fill out the application with the person. They'll sign, the person who is using the form needs to sign it, as well as the person acting on behalf of the agency. And by the person who's using the form, I mean the person getting their documents. I'll leave it at that for now with that piece.
I think we had a couple of questions recently about use of this form as it relates to voting. So quick point there is that if an individual uses this form to get their ID because they don't have a stable address, the service provider's address used is where they will be registered to vote. So that can mean a couple of things. So we tell them that, we explain it to them. And B, it also means whenever they get into stable housing, which I think is the part of the ultimate goal, and most people are coming to us to get this idea so that they can get into stable housing, then they can take the ID back to the DMV and change their address on the ID. And that's a much simpler process. So they can use the ID that's on their address for voting. We have to make sure the voter registration then is updated to match that address. So it's a little complicated there. I will also say there's sort of maybe like a privileged choice point here that I might feel like I do feel that voting is very important and is a great tool, and that there are some people for whom that is not a priority. And so it might be my priority, it might be something I'm really concerned about, but if the individual is like trying to get a job, get fed, and get housing, voting might not be high on their list. And so they might not even care that the address is or isn't related to their voting registration. So I think just proceed with caution, and we try to frame it from how much information can I equip you with so that you can make informed decisions for your life. I'm not making them for you, right? So if you know the consequences and then you're going to make the choice, then like go for it, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And something that I remember kind of waffling over last week, that so if you recall, when we were talking about the real versus non-real ID works for voting. You cannot use this to get the real ID, but you can use this to use the Go Vote Missouri funding, which we'll talk about later. So just because you're homeless doesn't mean you would be excluded from getting that ID for voting.
Awesome. So some folks might be required to submit additional documentation if the name on their identity document, which remember, that's where we started, so like your birth certificate, doesn't match their current name. So Madeline, do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say about this other than it is a very comprehensive toolkit that we will love for you to use at your own will. I'm not even certain what group came up with this document. Do you know which agency did the work behind this?
I'm pretty sure Promo was involved in it, but I don't know for a fact.
I think you're right. That sounds correct. But it's comprehensive. It helps people figure out how to go through this process. It is a legal process. And it is beyond the scope of our program. So we don't generally help people with this. We can always refer people to this kit. The kit itself is meant to be shared widely, so you'll have access to it and you are welcome to share it with people who need it. So I think that's what we'll say for that.
Yeah, I think usually when folks come to our clinic that have something missing, we, and I don't know if you do it differently, Madeline, but we try to not have that be a block for receiving the rest of the services. So if I know that someone's going to have to get their name legally changed, like that doesn't mean I'm not going to pay for their documents now or give them the check to, you know, when they do A, then B, then they'll be ready for step C. So again, I really try to encourage our volunteers to approach this as like, give the information, explain it, so that the individual can make those decisions. We even had a woman in the September clinic that knew that the name on her birth certificate isn't the name she uses regularly. It was like a, you know, first name, middle name sort of situation. And so she wanted to get it updated on her birth certificate so that she could have it updated on her ID. But when she knew that that was going to be like another step in the process, she was like, forget it. I'm going to leave it on the birth certificate. I'm going to leave it on the ID. I'm going to go get my ID and I will deal with changing my name later, because it was more important for her to get the ID. So she's still going to, like, in practice, use the name that she identifies with, but know that her documents, she's always going to have to explain why she goes by whatever and not the other thing.
Perfect.
Okay, the fifth piece for photo ID is payment. We've talked about this a little bit. So I can maybe outline our systems and then I'll pass to you, Madeline, to review the Go Vote Missouri stuff.
Super.
So in Missouri, a non-driver ID for 3 years costs $12. We always pay for $18 for the 6-year ID. There are a couple different systems. Our systems are different than Madeline's systems. So currently we're using check system. So I write checks for people when they're at clinic. They walk out the door with the check in hand, and a whole other packet of information about it and next steps. But that check then goes to the Vital Records office or to the Department of Revenue, and then they have it with them when they go in. Some programs set up voucher systems, so I'll tap to you in a second to talk about that, Madeline. We also, like I said, our program does utilize the Vital Check online service when needed, if we think it can help. So that's a bottleneck point in a clinic space because I'm the only one that can do that for our agency. So again, we try to avoid that, but otherwise, most of our stuff is covered by check. So Madeline, I don't know if you want to talk about your voucher system and then go.
Yeah. So we have a voucher system set up with the Vital Records office downtown, and it recently did expand to the county Vital Records office when we were starting to try to bring these outreach clinics or the clinics out into the community. It is simply a paper that has our raised seal on it. It's a letter that says we are, paying for X birth certificate. And there is an account down at the Vital Records office, an escrow account essentially, where they just deduct the amount each time that they get one of these vouchers. So
you like prepay that account, right? You like deposit that.
Exactly. So it's, it has an amount just about, there's a pot of money down there that gets tapped into every time they see one of our letters. So
could you say briefly how you set that up? Like, do you know how that was originally?
I'm not even sure. I want to say it might even predate Christine. So prior, like that's over 9 years.
I think when I first spoke to Christine, she was like, I'm pretty sure there was a conversation first with the Vital Records and that the office has a copy of what the voucher will look like. So that it's like money has to get deposited, first relationship, then money, like to make the account, and then clear communication about what form or voucher document is going to look like so that they know.
Yeah.
And then you also have some check fraud measures in place as well, I think, that Christine mentioned at one point. So we are happy to maybe go into more details. Yeah.
So then the other note is about Go Vote Missouri as a very good option for paying for documents. So it will cover the $18 amount. So a 6-year span of an ID for someone. We are kind of in the midst of calling around to the local, well, not just the local, statewide, checking in with the license offices to see that they are using this program. So we've kind of been calling to say, hey, I lost my ID. Can I come in and get my ID in time to vote? I need my ID to vote. Can I is there a free ID option? And people are generally saying yes, but not for replacements. So that's pretty frustrating because that's not true. The statute states that anyone who does not possess an ID is eligible for this voting ID, which is just the non-driver ID. Someone today actually said to me, yeah, the voting ID, and then, but it's not the non-driver ID. And I didn't say anything because I didn't say anything. I'm like, they are the same thing. They are the exact same thing. And so anyone who is eligible to vote, so 18 or older, not currently on probation or parole, and someone, you cannot have a felony conviction for voter fraud, which are very few people, but they exist. Anyone who's eligible to vote is eligible for this service one time in their life, no cost. The DMVs have been communicated about this many times from the DOR, from what we know. We also know that the Secretary of State office is under the similar impression that replacements are not covered, which again is not true. So just press them on this. I know that the City Hall office downtown is very clear on this. Some offices are very clear on the correct ways. At some point, we will try to figure out how to make sure everyone's on the same page. But for now, we're here. And it is a real program that you can use and have confidence in. So that's, I think, the big thing. And when you are utilizing that program, let the people know, go down to say, I am here for my free ID to vote, and they should not be denied.
I think that's a sort of also like program choice point maybe. So for us, I think because of the non-prevalent use of this by DOR offices, it requires some degree of self-advocacy. So for most people, you're going to have to say it and like say it again, or like explain and do something. So we've created a form, and Madeline just revised it, and it's gorgeous. So that should help, like something that you can present to the officer or the agent person and say like, this, I want this ID, like, see, it's a real thing, and here's some words on a page that makes it look real, even though it is actually in fact in statutes and they should know about it. But for us, there have certainly been individuals who are like sketched out by that, like, and don't feel confident that, you know, they're going to take the time to finally go down to the DMV, and then they're going to run the risk of being turned away because some particular agent doesn't know about this program. And that doesn't feel like an equitable solution. So for us, we are sort of on a case by case. We talk to people about it. We confirm that if they're eligible, we give them all the information, and then we give them the choice. And definitely there's been some people who are like, yeah, absolutely, I want that for free. Like, that's my right. I'm going to go get it. And there have certainly been other people who don't feel confident or comfortable doing that, in which case we just write the check. And then we save up the data for future conversations of advocacy and that nature with the Secretary of State.
Yes.
Okay, so that part, we're gonna pause there for a minute. That part covers what we usually do in the volunteer training, with the exclusion of the, like, you wanna end with, here's what you do next. You wanna make sure that you give them an opportunity to sign up. If not on that night or day, training moment, then make sure that you know how you're going to communicate with them so that you can activate them when you're ready. So the other thing that I've developed is a little bit more, I call it a volunteer orientation, because many of our volunteers were trained in the summer, but then we didn't start a program until 2 months later for some folks. So I created like a volunteer orientation training that I offer like within a few days for when the clinic happens or when the volunteers are going to have to sign up. And at that training orientation, I go into like a little bit more detail. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to like click through it very quickly tonight so that you can kind of see it. Certainly the slides are available and you know, you can utilize it if it's helpful. I also wanted to mention that like we have created a volunteer program startup guide. So all kinds of resources are on this website, which is the Missouri State ID Access Coalition. And within that, you can see some documentation tabs in the corners and also figure out how to join the coalition if you aren't already. But there's in the program startup guide, there's a series of questions that I would encourage you to ask sort of before you get to the training point, so that you know how you're going to engage, who you're going to engage, and that you know that people who need this service will be able to find you, right? So I want to move into then a quick overview of what the volunteer orientation looks like. It mostly just covers the day-to-day, like, okay, now that you did this training, you probably don't remember any of it because you probably left training feeling totally overwhelmed because we just talked for an hour and a half and you saw flowcharts and graphs and all kinds of pieces of information. No one needs to know any of it. So the volunteer orientation is the like, you've got this moment, and some people like a little more information. So that's what this tries to do. We do same introductions, grounding. I go through a day overview. I make really clear language, try to make really clear language around the specific volunteer roles, any sort of space logistics, like where are we, how's it set up, what's the flow going to be like, because I think some people feel anxious about that sometimes. And certainly in our case, people came up to the hub and no one had ever been to that building before. So there was just a lot of questions about getting there and that sort of thing. And then I talked very briefly about volunteer responsibilities. So like when you get there, I don't need everyone to immediately come find me and start talking to me, but like you can get your name tag and then you can do that, and you can do that, right? So it's kind of just going through all the spaces. Again, grounding, how I start is usually something about access and power and why this is important. I'm happy to share my reflection and things if that's helpful for you. I give people a quick refresher that, remember, we're doing the clinic so that we can help folks get these documents, and this is what we're going to bring to it, right? The day overview, I kind of go through like reminder, if you signed up for like the first shift, you're coming an hour before the clinic starts because I need help setting up. You sign up for the last shift, like you're going to stay an hour late, but probably not. We'll probably take down early and you'll be good to go. We provide lunch for volunteers during clinic days. So that's kind of what I go through just very briefly. Then we talk about the general like space, actual movement of people throughout the day, right? There's like an intake station, then they get paired with a volunteer for application support. Then the guest is at the table, volunteers come to me for financial support, signatures, notaries, copy and scanning, anything like that. They go back to the application supports table where the guest is and escort them out to the checkout station where there's usually voter registration available for folks to sort of check or have that available if they want it. And then a final checkout and make sure they have everything that they need. I also review volunteer tools. So I had a lot of volunteers who were like, I went to the training 2 months ago. I don't remember anything. I don't know how to do this. And I was like, okay, take a deep breath, because you have a million tools, not really, but you have several tools that are really comprehensive to help guide you through the day. You should be able to show up as a volunteer with nothing. In our space, a mask, you should show up with a mask, but even if you forget that, I'll give it to you. And have everything sort of for you. So we have a big volunteer binder that is like organized in the flow of the day. So you should be relatively easy to use, has multiple copies of the documents that they'll need. We have an application support checklist, which I'll go through briefly in a minute. We have laptops. I created a project website. There's an application support guide. So there's all kinds of pieces. We have everything in a big tote, which is what I learned from College Church program. So each like application station has a tote with everything in it that they need. I've also encouraged people to use each other. So sometimes volunteers pull in the other volunteers to troubleshoot and brainstorm, and that's desired, right? I usually end the volunteer orientation with like, here's a bunch of these responsibilities. And what's not on here is that you know everything, because that's not your role here, right? Your role is to show up and be a loving, awesome neighbor who's going to help give information to people who haven't had access to it like you and I might have. We use an application support checklist to navigate the day. This is sort of the intake form is in the box at the top, and then the rest of it walks through everything else that is gathered throughout the day. This is kind of the general intake form that's usually filled out at registration or intake. And then the rest of the form is filled out throughout the day. And so we go through this in much more detail in the orientation, because for me, the yellow form is the data full loop, right? So this yellow sheet gets turned back in at checkout. And that's how I know exactly who we saw, why they came, what services they got, how we helped them, how we didn't. All of the information gets on this yellow sheet. And that's then what I use to track data at the end. I talk about volunteer roles. So again, kind of following that map of like how people move throughout the day. If we have enough volunteers, we have multiple people in each of the roles. I will say that we have not been successful in offering childcare. I have also found that like generally we haven't had like crowds of people with like tens of children sitting around like being bored. There have been parents that bring a kid and the kid just goes along for the ride. A couple times we had a tote with like some coloring books and stuff like that. So maybe that's something that you're gonna learn as you go and be ready for it or not. It is important to have a notary on site. So we've had notary volunteers to date, and I'm in the process of becoming a notary so that we can guarantee that one will be there as well. I do spend some time talking about space logistics. Again, there's lots of questions about that. I give people a map if there's specific, like, don't go this way, definitely go this way, try to avoid this way, any sorts of details. At least my volunteers appreciate having, like, feeling very, very confident that they know what they're supposed to do. We even go through like a diagram of like, here's how the space is going to be set up, and here's where the stations are, and here's where you should be. And some people find this helpful, and other people are like, girl, please let me just show up and volunteer. But you know, we try to cover all those bases. I do end with a little bit of like document reminders. Remember, like, you're going to use these sheets and those sheets and these sheets, and here's the flow charts. Don't forget the flow charts. The first thing in the binder, they walk you through everything. And this is also just like a real grounding in like, remember, we're going to do these documents. That's why we're showing up. That's what people need from us. Finally, we conclude with volunteer responsibilities, how people show up. Our volunteers sign a confidentiality agreement, and the first thing that volunteers do with the guest is sign a community agreement, which talks about how I will treat you and how you will treat me, and also names that we are only able to provide financial support once per year. So that also happens and has some like helpful language about it. This is also where I remind people, like, you're not supposed to know everything. You're supposed to ask a million questions, and let's have a great day and rah, 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 and see you next time. So that's all I got for volunteer orientation in 6-8 minutes. Madeline? That's great.
No, I think just like from our perspective, it's been so cool watching this clinic get set up, and we're so happy that like the days that we can't take people, we have this other option to send folks to. It's been a really awesome partnership, and we have learned a lot from like the way that you've implemented. And so that's something very cool about all of this, is that as each of you get started on the ways that you'll set this up and do this and how it makes sense to each of you, we're excited to keep talking about that, because we kind of are all learning together, and kind of best practices sharing, things are evolving, and something you see we didn't notice, and it's really great to have this loop happening now. So it's very cool. So we can head to next steps. Okay. If you are here because voting is important, don't forget Election Day. It's coming up. The registration deadline's passed, but people who are registered can still get their IDs and vote the regular ballot. Of course, if they don't have their photo ID that day, they will have to vote a provisional ballot, just something to be aware of. Excuse-based absentee voting has begun. Oh, thank you. And in-person voting starts tomorrow. In person, no excuse. So great, thanks. That is helpful correction. One of these days, well, I plan to vote in person prior to that day. So anyway, it'll happen. I'm glad we've got the correct date now. Let's make sure we're sharing that one. 2 days following the election, we've got our monthly meeting. So November 10th, the Thursday, 10 a.m. We'd love to have you there. Please come join us. And then Sarah's kind of her monthly walk-in clinic happens the next week on a Wednesday. The Thursday that follows that day, we have our open office hours for just kind of drop in co-work time. What questions are you mulling over? What things are you stuck on? What are you curious about? Let's work together. If you want to come in, we've got the Zoom link. We'll share that at some point. It's on our website. And then the last hub clinic is December 7th for now. So that is a conversation that's ongoing about what happens next.
So a couple next steps for you all. So those next steps is generally what I would share, like something along those lines. Updated is what I would share at the end of the volunteer training, with a link if you have it already for like sign up here or save the date. Give that to your volunteers. Try to engage them when they're there for the training. Couple other next steps, just like broadly, maybe for this group, as you are training to be the trainers. So folks are welcome to join our efforts, which I know is not helpful for everyone if you're not in St. Louis, but if you want to come for a day and like observe or like bring a team and show up and do it with us, or if you want to have us come visit you, like we can do, I'm sure we can work that out. But I just popped some links in there. So you can certainly volunteer with ASHRAE. We have weekly Thursday office hours by appointment only. Those usually get filled on Tuesdays when College Church has to close their doors, and then my phone rings and then we fill up on Thursdays. We've also put the link in the chat a couple times about the statewide coalition and the regional program support subcommittee of that. So if you want to get involved in that, please follow the link in the chat. And then we're not going to talk about it too much tonight, but if you're like totally into fundraising and thinking about radical ways for collective fundraising and pooled fundraising, this is a really exciting piece that we're just finally starting to get into. So I will be excited to keep thinking through that together. You probably can volunteer at the College Church Clinic, and that probably is an email to you or to Christine.
Yeah, go ahead and email me. I'll get you connected to our outreach coordinator, but happy to have additional volunteers. Yeah. There are a couple other engagement pieces here. Several folks that are doing our photo ID clinics are also signing up to be election protection volunteers. We do have one of our next step pages that everyone gets is about voting. So it's like, check your registration and here's the date. But then there's another piece that's like, if you're at the polls, you have a right to vote. And so here's the election protection hotline and here's who you can call. And we just like talk to people about that. And for some folks, they've never heard that information. So it can feel really empowering to have someone treat you and speak to you like your voice matters. So we try to do that. Then finally, I think you open invitation to join Madeline and me and several others through what will be lots of advocacy over the next several years to change the laws, which is no small task in Jefferson City, but there I always find it to be transformational opportunities to go even when we don't get the acute win. So show up to vote, be sure to take your friends with you, tweet about it, talk about it, scream about it, and 8th on November 8th. And I think that's all. And apologies, I didn't update this slide with your information, Madeline. I just saw that. So I'm just gonna maybe stop sharing the slides since that's not helpful. Question in the chat, Ruth, training slides in the original Google Doc. So on the website, maybe is it helpful to like show the website? Sure. Yeah, go ahead. We can share our calendar tool.
Okay, so when you go to bit.ly/MoID access, it looks like this. Has some general information about the coalition. Up here in the right corner, can you see this? Is this right? Okay. In the right corner, it says ID Clinic resources. So if you click on that, you can find here some trainings, recorded trainings, the clinic startup toolkit, quick start resources, links to our programs. We're trying to keep this updated with some volunteer trainings. Training handouts is where you'll find most of the slides. If you encounter something that is in PDF, but it's very clearly like PowerPoint slides, let us know because we will make sure you get access to it. In the documentation tab is where you should find most of the links for all of the stuff that we create and produce and use and edit 1,200 times. So there's a quick start folder, which has some of the very things that you might need right away. Our document templates are included here. So you should be able to download just about anything that we've talked about or referenced and find it here in an editable way. If you don't find it in an editable format, just let me know, because I'm trying to make sure that it's all here. But if it's not, then I'll give it to you. We included the out-of-state birth certificates list here. Again, these are all PDFs. So for what I do for like our clinics, I have that linked and like open on my laptop in the sort of admin table, but I also have like a copy printed out of everyone. And so then I can just make a copy of it. If someone's like, oh, I need a Colorado one, I can just pull up the file and make a physical copy. Voting ID one pager, clinic startup guide link, and then this is the link to join the co-working session that Madeline referenced. I think there was a chat, was there?
Yeah. Ooh, will you just share one more time for the calendar?
I forgot. How did I forget?
But yeah.
But here's another exciting part is in the Get Assistance tab, we are trying to develop a statewide calendar. Madeline, do you want to talk us through that? Sorry.
Yeah. So we've got a couple, we are aware of a couple of clinics across the state. Ruth, you're with the Columbia group, aren't you? So thanks for sharing with us your information, and hopefully your clinics have been going well. But yeah, anyone who has information, we hope that this will become more full and be just a good landing spot for people, even just providers who are looking for services for the people that they're working with. But yeah, we've got it so that it's sort of the first thing that you can see is where this clinic is happening. And then we have it differentiated by walk-in or appointments. And then lastly, like who is providing that service. So you can click on each one. There's more information in there with just all sorts of additional information that's helpful. So if you have a clinic and you'd like it to be reflected here, we'd love to add it. Just let us know. Yeah.
So I think that's all we have for tonight. So we can pause and do questions.
Yeah, thanks for bearing with us. It's a lot of info.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say this is so impressive. Oh my God, I can't believe, when back in the day when I wanted to be a social worker, this is what I had planned to do, stuff like this, but got too much education, end up teaching. But yeah, this is really impressive. Oh my God. You guys must be so proud of yourselves.
It's just been exciting. I mean, I feel like I only started in this position back in August, and there's so much momentum, and none of it from me. It's just exciting that everyone is here. And so we're grateful for that for sure.
I think it's like, for me, equal parts impressive, but then I'm also like enraged and disgusted that it takes like this much stuff to help people get access to something that I think should be like automatic, if I'm being honest. So I think we're also starting to have conversations in the back end of like, how do we actually push our thinking way outside of let's make this work for everyone, and like flip those tables so we're not talking about people getting scraps, right? Like I want people to sit with seats at the table, full stop. So like, how do we do that? Does it look like a mobile DMV clinic that's also run by nonprofit? Does it look like changing laws? Does it look like, like in Europe, I've heard they use like an app for like ID things. So like, it doesn't have to be this way. And that's also what I get angry for. So I carry those things. I try to keep the rage like right here and let it out when,
Oh, believe it or not, I did have one question. How do you know the person is the person?
Great question.
Go ahead now.
I was just going to say that like sometimes I think there have been times even when I've like asked them, can you pull up your social media, or like, can you just, can we call someone who can tell me that, yeah, this is who you're talking to? That it is a good question. Like sometimes that poses to me even this like greater philosophical question about like why we identify, like what is the need for this identification from someone else, like if is someone who they say they are. I don't know. It's a big question, but
I also, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead into some more like real detail of actual how we do it.
I think for me, there's sort of a space when someone, you know, there's some like internal biases that I have to check every time I show up in this space, as in most spaces. And there's also places of like, you're instantly rattling off all kinds of information about you that you know, but you can't prove it. And so my job is to be like, that's proof enough, right? So someone could be straight up lying to me and they're still gonna have to produce all of the documents to get the thing. So it would have to be a pretty impressive depth, because it's not just say it, right? Like you have to know it, and then you've all seen how much you have to document from it. So I think there's a space of like, you know, could someone who is unhoused be unhoused in East St. Louis and come to this clinic and then get a Missouri ID using my address? Yeah. And like also, okay, like I'm gonna do my best due diligence. And if they're coming up with a Missouri birth certificate and a this and that and the other, then like, do I actually? You know?
And you know what? You're right, because somewhere along the way, they have to sign something attesting to all of the information they provided is accurate. Right.
Correct.
Right. So it's not on you. Every now and then I'll have a student whose name does not match them. And because their name doesn't match, I can't remember it because the name doesn't fit the person. And so every now and then that happens. And I was wondering, you know, how did you guys deal with it? But I like your answers. Thank you.
I've also been impressed how much documents, albeit not useful for these purposes, people can come up with, like photographs of old expired, you know, like screen phone shots of old expired licenses and IDs. This woman last week brought in a Missouri birth certificate that I was like, oh my God, this is gonna fall apart while I'm looking. It was like so fragile and delicate. I like very quickly made a very delicate copy of it, put it in a plastic envelope, and then was like, here's some more things. And like, she was coming to get a new one because she was terrified that this was gonna fall apart. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think my charge is to practice trust, and there will always be people that are going to abuse trust, but I would rather operate from a space of trust than from a space of distrust.
That's cool.
Other questions? Ruth, I saw you on camera for a minute. Good to see you.
Well, if anything pops up for you down the road, you've got our emails. I'll just put mine in the chat one more time.
When you guys talked about volunteering at the clinic, you mean volunteering to be one of the people to help fill out the documents, not just volunteering to come and pass out coffee or something?
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've had some volunteers that like try to sign up for like, I'm going to do intake, and then we don't get enough volunteers. And I'm like, you're doing application support. I'm going to walk you through it. So it's also okay. For example, if you want to not do a sign up form and be like, I just want to shadow, like I'm not actually going to take up a volunteer slot, and you just want to like come check it out. Like some volunteers have done that anyway, or when we're slow, we'll have like 3 volunteers sit at a table, and I'm always like, can you just ask the guest if they're comfortable with that and explain why you want to sit there? And then if it's okay, like, sure. And people have found that really helpful. It's a lot of theory and like stuff in your head until you're sitting there with someone doing it. And that process is what helps, I think, most. Also, my Thursday office hours are really pretty calm because we're not in like the clinic craze of a lot of people at once. So you get a lot more like hands-on one-to-one with like me, a guest, and a volunteer to like walk through everything. So that can be a less intimidating space for someone new as well. Hi, buddy.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Was good training. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, they're all just getting home from the SLU basketball games.
Thank you so much.
I just had a quick question, and maybe you covered this, but typically how many volunteers do you use? Like for what size of an event?
it sounds like it might be loud at Madeline's and it looks like she's typing. So best case scenario for a full clinic day that for us is open 9 to 2, 10 to 2, volunteer hours are 9 to 3. I try to have 12 volunteers per shift. So at any given time, there should be 12 people. I will say last week, we had like 6 volunteers for the whole day. So we made it work with far less people. And there was like less of a crowd. We were pretty consistent. We saw about 15 people in that one time period. That's very different than 60 people a day. So for us, yeah, it looks like Madeline's saying 12 to 16 on just application support. And so we probably have 12 like for everyone. We're operating 4 application support stations at a time. So we could like see 4 guests at a time. And it could be more. We've like thrown in more sometimes that Madeline and Christine were both there. We just like made up another station and they sat down and did it. So some differences between our programs, if that makes sense.
So one other question. So do you have laptops hooked to printers that are USB, or do you have like office printers that, or do you even have to print off things?
Yeah, so I would say most recently we stopped having a laptop like at every station. The first clinic I did, I like made a whole like volunteer intraweb and people were like trying to use things online because I thought that would be easier than having like tons of paper. It was not. So we have laptops available, but it is usually for if they need to pull an out-of-state one, or if they need to do something creative, right? Like let's check selective service. Can you get access to your Ameren bill online? Oh, your phone died and doesn't have Wi-Fi, use it. So it's mostly a resource, but everything that the volunteers should need, for me anyway, is in the binder. So unlike College Church's program, I don't have volunteers doing like live data entry or like putting data into a spreadsheet after they've completed work with a guest. I do that on the back end. Again, that's a capacity question. So we do have laptops. They are connected wirelessly to a printer, but they're not, I would say like not required in order to run a clinic.
Exactly what she said.
Yeah, those are the details that I think could make it more successful. And if you don't think about those little things, so I was just curious, but.
I guarantee you that every time we do it, I think of some other little thing that I'm like, ooh, that could be really helpful. And then I try to write it down and remember it before the next time. Like the certification of homeless status, I want that pre-printed with my agency information on it. I have yet to do that. And so then I sit there and I write everything down, like, why didn't I do this ahead of time? And we'll see if I can do it ahead of the next time. So, okay, anything else? Awesome.
Again,
Oh.
thank you.
Go ahead, Ruth.
No, just thank you.
How are things going in Como?
We have not had a client, but the League of Women Voters has a committee that's working with the schools and registered all the 18-year-olds. And today they were to walk together to the county clerk's office to vote absent, tomorrow, I'm sorry, to vote absentee. And I talked with them and they were like, oh, we've got to make sure they all have the correct ID. So we may be getting some of those students.
Great. Well, keep us posted. And I think Madeline and I are available as much as we can be for coaching or quick calls, talk through a thing. How do you do this? How do you do that? And again, if you're thinking like, man, I bet they created something for this, we probably did and just forgot to put it on the website. So if you are thinking about it.
So helpful, so helpful.
Yeah,
But thank
that's
you
the thing.
very
That is
much.
helpful, yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you. Have a
All right.
great evening.
Good night.
Bye now.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good night.